Chapter 13. The Grand Tour. The project was an immense and challenging one. Despite having a crew of 4, the Archangel only had 2 spacesuits on board. Being the most well-trained and most experienced of the group, it was Inez who took command during the spacewalks. Twice a day, Inez and one other would don their suits and attach themselves to the Angel with tethers. Then they would bound from the Angel to Sajuk, with tools in hand. While the spacewalkers were cutting open Sajuk's hull, the 2 left behind started making modifications to the Archangel itself. Akira had always known the progenitor hyperspace cores were simply too large to fit inside of the spaceplane, and she came up with a plan to circumvent this issue. The foursome set about their tasks, recovering the hyperspace cores and retrofitting the spaceplane. This was by no means an easy task, especially when it had to be carried out with the few tools on board and with only 1 fully trained crew member. Inez was the busiest out of everyone. Not only did she have to work every day on one of the 2 ships, but she also used her downtime to teach the others how to fly the Archangel. Akira would spend several hours a day in the cockpit absorbing lessons about zero-G maneuvering, atmospheric flight, reaction control systems, and other details about spaceflight. About a week after they arrived, the most significant progress was made. The protective shell over the hyperspace cores was finally removed, exposing the cores themselves for the first time. Inez and Akira suited up and spacewalked over to the ruined warship for a closer look. It was still vaguely possible to see which spacefaring civilization had possessed each core. The Bentusi core showed signs of the hasty repair work done to it after the Battle of Abbasid. The Higaran core still had a painting of the angel moon on its side, and the Vagar core was smooth to the touch after being left in deep space for untold millennia. Akira gasped in awe at the incredible sight, fogging up the inside of her helmet. As she ran one gloved hand along the shell of the Bentusi core just to make sure she wasn't dreaming. "Nezzy, do you know how old these things are?" Akira asked. "I don't know," Inez admitted. "I've heard stories about where these things come from, though. An ancient race that died out a long time ago, or something like that." The 2 women selected the Higaran core and started trying to cut it free with shipbreaking tools. Meanwhile, as they worked, Akira began to tell Inez the story of the core trinity, neglecting to mention that she had first heard this tale from her own parents. She began at the beginning. 1 million years ago, the galaxy was invaded and conquered by a race of beings known as the progenitors. These aliens, coming from some forever unknown origin, possessed technologies and knowledge far beyond what anybody could comprehend. The progenitor empire controlled the entire galaxy, building great cities on seemingly inhospitable worlds and dispatching armadas of starships that were so vast they blotted out all light. So great was their knowledge and power that the progenitors were able to create intelligent life. Many spacefaring civilizations, such as the Higarans, Tidani, Bentusi, Ashurians, Kelt, and the Mycor, owed their existence to the progenitors. But there was one other marvel of technology they created. Not too far from the center of the galaxy, the progenitors constructed a gargantuan structure. This megalith was the size of a gas giant like Saturn, and it was the centerpiece of the progenitor's greatest creation, the hyperspace network. Scattered all over the cosmos were millions of gateways, interconnecting the galaxy and cutting interstellar travel times down to the point where moving between stars was but a trivial matter. In the middle of it all was the Eye of Iran. This one gateway linked everything together as the beating heart of both the galaxy and the Empire. It was all thanks to just one member of their race. Or at least, that's how the story goes. According to myth and legend, a progenitor named Sajuk built a great interstellar forge in the Karos region, where he forged the core trinity, the same set of hyperspace cores now in front of Inez and Akira. With these cores, Seljuk unlocked the final mysteries of hyperspace, although what those mysteries were, Akira could only guess. With these cores, Seljuk could travel to any point in the galaxy instantaneously. The sheer distance between stars was meaningless to the progenitors. Seljuk could fly from Higara to Karak to Partoga, Ashuria, Kelta, Mykonon, to Tidan, and to the Angel Moon in less time than it takes to read these very words. With these 3 cores, there was no limit to the reach and power of the progenitor empire. And then, just 10,000 years ago, it all ended. Without any fanfare or warning, the progenitor empire simply vanished, seemingly overnight. Their cities crumbled to ruin, while all that remained of their great starships and fleets was a glittering infinity of wire, mysteries, and microcircuits. A small number of progenitor ships survived the cataclysm. Automated warships, controlled by artificial intelligence, continued patrolling the galaxy as though their masters were still alive. But the progenitors themselves left no clue to their fate. With their makers gone, the core trinity were scattered. Eventually, the first core was recovered by the Bentusi, who used it to set up the outer limb trade routes. The second core was recovered by the Higarans, who weaponized the core in not 1, but 3 major wars that changed the course of galactic history. The third core was found by the Vagar warlord Makan, who was a worshipper of Seljuk. Makan and the Vagar started a holy war for the other 2 cores, but the conflict did not turn in his favor. Makan faced off against Karen Sajet for control of the progenitor warship Seljuk, and lost both his life and his core. The Higarans only held on to the core trinity for a few decades. The Second Hyperspace War started in 2015, and the Hyperspace Cores, along with the progenitor warship Seljuk, eventually found themselves at their final resting place, just 25 miles above the moon. As Akira finished the story, the Higaran Hyperspace Core finally came loose. Inez used a tether and a winch to hold the core steady, and then she and Akira started to cut away the outer casing. "It feels like there's something inside," Inez commented. "It weighs a little more than what I was expecting." Making sure to keep a hold of the core, Akira maneuvered around the side and found a hatch. The mechanism was jammed after being shut for 2 decades, so Akira used her diamond-tipped cutter to force the door open. She gasped and nearly let go of the core when she realized what exactly was inside. "Higarans!" Akira called out. "They're all dead!" There were 6 bodies inside of the core, left as they were when they perished during the war in heaven. With great care, she extracted the remains of the Higaran crew. Keeping her eyes down, Akira tried her best to avoid looking at their faces, many of which were still frozen in their final expressions. One by one, Akira let the 5 bodies drift away, until there was just 1 corpse remaining. Deep within the core, Akira could see the figure of a woman who seemed to be entangled in wire and cables. She tugged on her tether to make sure it was still attached to the Archangel, then Akira ventured into the Hyperspace Core. Karen Sajet died at her post. The Higaran leader's eyes were open and glassy, and she'd been pulled partway out of her integration assembly by whatever force had destroyed Seljuk. Akira cut the last remaining wires attached to the top of Karen's head and the back of her neck and set her loose. The former Seljuk car drifted away into the darkness of space and was lost. Inez watched the bodies drift away before waving at Akira and pressing the talk button on her radio. "Okay, Scarlet, we're clear. Reel us in." All of the tether cables tensed up, and the Higaran Hyperspace Core started moving towards the Archangel with its 2 living riders in tow. The space plane opened up her cargo bay doors, while Scarlet and Ingrid waved from the cockpit. Everything was ready. November 9th, 2060. High orbit above the moon. A soft knocking caught Akira's attention. She was sitting at the dining table, a half-eaten packet of space rations drifting lazily through the air by her head. In front of her, 6 tablet computers were stuck to the tabletop by magnets, and each screen was filled with mathematical formulas, historical research, and diagrams of timelines warped by the butterfly effect. Whoever was on the other side of the door knocked again, this time a little more forcefully, and Akira reluctantly looked up from her work and said, "This better be important." "I just shut down the nuclear reactor," Inez called through the door. "Do you still have power in there?" Akira startled and looked around quickly. The lights were still on, and the air recycler was running perfectly. For the first time in almost 2 weeks, Akira's heart started racing. "Internal power?" she gasped, springing to her feet and making her way to the door. "We're really running off the core?" Akira unlocked and opened the door to find a very excited-looking Inez on the other side. "It's just like Weir said in his notes," she said. "The progenitors clearly designed their tech to play nice with anyone who came after them. The core just barely fits inside the cargo bay, but Scarlet was able to wire it into our grid." "How do we control it?" Akira asked. "Interface in the cockpit," Inez replied. "Once the core is fully charged, the sky's the limit." On Akira's command, all loose equipment was stored away. The cargo hold was sealed, and then everybody put on their flight suits and helmets. Once preparations were complete, the foursome gathered in the cockpit. Inez took the pilot's seat. Akira filled the co-pilot position. Scarlet took the engineer's station on the left, behind Akira, while Ingrid filled the right-hand engineer's chair. "We've got to do some tests first," Akira told the others, "to make sure the core is working right. Scarlet, did you replace the Ethereum core with the Illyrium one we took from that Advent ship?" "It fit like a glove," Scarlet reported, "and the navigation computer accepted the new parameters without messing with the old ones." "So that means," Ingrid started to say, "it means we have the ability to far jump and time jump now," Inez finished. The trio sounded eager to begin, but Akira urged caution. "We should test the hyperspace function first, before we start jumping through time. Nezzy, how long would it take us to get to, I don't know, the furthest, most distant place in the solar system from here?" Inez screwed up her face as she thought. Then she leaned forward and started to punch a command into the navigation computer. A moment later, she read off the results. Okay, so the furthest point of interest from here is Pluto-Charon. It's a pair of dwarf planets, about 40 astronomical units from here." "How long would it take to get there on a conventional drive?" Scarlet asked. "If we were cruising 36,000 miles per hour, Inez replied, "it would take about 10 years to reach Pluto from the moon." Akira tugged on her helmet to make sure it was secure. "Nezzy," she commanded, "do a short jump. Put us over Pluto." Everybody held their breath nervously as the hyperspace core spooled up. "Just think," Ingrid said. "There's only 2.5 feet of solid lead protecting us from the gamma radiation that core is putting out." "Actually, let's not think about it," Scarlet snapped. The Archangel turned to face a distant, very dim point of light. Her engines throttled down to idle. In the cockpit, there was silence for a moment. And then Inez declared, "Hyperspace module fully charged." Akira gave the word. "Engage!" A semi-transparent wall of purple light materialized in front of the spaceplane. For a brief moment it hung there, mesmerizing Akira with its beauty. Then the quantum wavefront swept backwards, enveloping the Archangel. When the whole vessel was swallowed, the wavefront dissipated and was gone. The Archangel had entered hyperspace. Inside the ship, Akira cried out, "Draw the blast curtains!" A dazzling white light was shining straight into the cockpit, blinding everyone. Finally, Inez managed to reach up and grab a tattered blackout curtain and pulled it across the windscreen. as the overpowering light was shut out of the cockpit, things started to get really weird. Right away, all of the controls stopped working, and Akira lost her sense of balance. She had no idea which way was up or down or left or right. She had to jam her eyes shut because it felt like the whole universe was folded in half. Space and time as she perceived them suddenly stopped adding up, but closing her eyes wasn't enough. Through her gift, through telekinesis, Akira could actually feel the warping of space-time around her, as though the ship was nothing more than a flat reflection on a pool of water. Alarms began sounding in the cockpit. Akira opened her eyes to see that all of the controls were frozen now. No thrusters, no stabilizers, no reaction control of any kind. The vessel began to shake and shudder, but just as Akira was starting to worry, it was over. The quantum waveform reappeared once more and deposited the Archangel in a very dark and very cold region of space. After a moment's pause, the blackout curtain came down, and all four women gasped. Down below was a very small, icy world. A dusty ring around the planetoid was all that remained of Charon, Pluto's largest satellite. A horrible gash ran across Pluto's surface, carving a path of destruction hundreds of miles long, slicing right through the center of a heart-shaped basin. The sun itself was hard to discern at this distance. From here, it seemed like just any other star. The stunned disbelief wore off after just a few seconds, and Akira, full of joy, took the controls, which had started to work again. While her friends cheered and celebrated, Akira took the spaceplane down for a close encounter with the rings of Pluto. Akira skimmed the rings, kicking up dust and debris with the backblast from the engines. "Okay, so that was a short jump," Inez cried and laughed at the same time. "It's time to try a far jump." "Yeah, let's see if the progenitors really solve the mysteries of hyperspace," Scarlet added. Akira pulled up on the control column and picked a portion of a star field at random. She took one hand off the controls and pointed towards the constellation known as Leo, the lion. "What's the brightest star up there?" Akira said. "Let's see the brightest star in Leo." Inez typed out a command in the navigation computer. "That's Regulus," Inez said. "It's a quadruple star system. 4 stars all hanging out together, about 79 light-years from here." "4 stars together?" Ingrid sounded intrigued. "I'm game. Let's go take a look." "Far jump ready?" Akira called out from the co-pilot seat. "Call it, Nezzy." One more time, the quantum wavefront appeared, but this time it was different. There was no bright light, no chaotic noise or control failure. The instant the shimmering wall of purple light washed over the ship, Akira and her companions found themselves staring at an incredible sight. The Regulus star system seemed to just appear out of nowhere. Akira and the others had to blink their eyes several times to fully comprehend what they were seeing. 4 stars, each one a different size and shape, were dancing around one another, filling the whole system with magnificent blue and red lights. The biggest star was spinning so fast that it was bulging in the middle, something that Scarlet found to be nothing short of hilarious. It was her laughter that caused Akira, Ingrid, and Inez to realize the full scale of what had just happened. Very slowly, Ingrid turned to face Inez. Did we really just go... How many light years?" 79, Inez breathed. "And we did it in less than a second. That was... We just did a far jump." Scarlet and Akira punched the air with their fists and cried out, "Yes!" Now they had one half of the puzzle piece. It was time to see if they had the other. Less than 1 second after departing the Regulus system, the Archangel rematerialized in orbit over Earth. On board, her crew started to make preparations for their first attempt at a time jump. Akira and Scarlet found a spare digital clock in the living quarters and sealed it inside of a distress beacon. Then they launched the beacon into space. Scarlet got on the radio and listened to it until it was out of range. The modified distress beacon repeated the current date over and over again. Today is Tuesday, November 9th, in the year 2060. In the crew compartment, Inez used the targeting computer to take pictures of points of interest on the ground. She spotted a live volcano in Iceland, a hurricane bearing down on the American coastline, and a forest fire making its way through southern China. She made a note of these 3 points. Finally, Inez synchronized her analog wristwatch to the ship's digital computer. "The computer should account for our movement in time," Inez told the others. "If this works, the two won't match up afterward." "So, how far are we going for our test?" Akira folded her arms in thought for a moment, then said, "Let's go forward 1 week. Today's the 9th, so let's go to the 16th. This time, Akira and Inez drew the blackout curtains before engaging the Hyperspace Core. But things weren't going to be so simple now. Time jumping was going to require a little more work. Akira gave up the co-pilot seat and moved into the engineer station, allowing Scarlet to take her place. "This is where that Illyrium core is going to come in handy," Akira told the others. "Inez, you need to program the computer for a far jump, but set the destination coordinates for exactly the same point as our departure. I'm going to use the modified core to open a vent gate." Scarlet, who was feeling jumpy, tried to say something humorous. "Dimensional gate? Do you take quantum waveform as your lawfully wedded wife?" Akira used a little telepathy to ease Scarlet's fears. The trio were so far under Akira's power and influence that now it took very little effort for her to make them go along with what she wanted. Akira took a deep, steadying breath, and everyone else did the same. "This is it," Akira breathed. "Engage!" A quantum wavefront opened up in front of the spaceplane, but this time, instead of the familiar, translucent purple light, this one was bright yellow. The waveform swept backwards, and in less than 2 seconds, it was over. Everyone looked around expectantly, and a little confused. "Wait, that's it?" Scarlet said. "I don't think we even moved." Akira felt her heart drop into her stomach. For just a moment, she wondered if the modified core had failed. But then she looked down at the sensors and instruments on the dashboard. "We moved!" Akira gasped. "No, we didn't," Inez corrected her. "The universe is what moved. I think we did it." Inez stood up and pulled the blackout curtains back, and all 4 women cheered at what they saw. The Earth was gone. There was nothing but stars. Akira quickly looked down and pulled up the ship's digital clock. "Today's date is Tuesday, November 16th, 2060, Akira called out, "and the clock is still ticking." Inez swung the nose around to face Earth. The brown and gray planet had made 7 days' worth of progress in its journey around the sun, and it was quite small in the window. 1 far jump later, and the Angel was over Earth again. All 4 of the crew ran to find a camera to look down on the surface. Akira's heart rose as she spotted the remnants of the Atlantic hurricane dissipating in the American Northeast. Then Inez laid eyes on the wildfire in China, which had grown out of control and was making its way towards northern Vietnam. Scarlet and Ingrid had trouble finding the Iceland volcano, only to realize that it was no longer active. The cheering and clapping that rang through the ship was only amplified when someone picked up on the week-old distress beacon that repeated again and again, "Today is Tuesday, November 16th, in the year 2060. Too excited to hold still, Akira unstrapped herself and moved to the back of the fuselage, emerging a moment later with one of her tablet computers. Her whole body was trembling with the realization that her long-shot plan was just one obstacle away from being possible. This is it," she told the others. "I've made a list. These are all the moments in the past we would have to change in order for our time to be a better one. It's all got to do with the butterfly effect, see? Each of Akira's companions had seen bits and pieces of her plan before, but never the whole thing. Scarlet marveled at the list of events and asked when Akira had time to study so much history. Inez, being the least up to speed on the concept of the butterfly effect, had to be given a quick lesson in chaos theory. Finally, Ingrid was the only one with a skeptical idea. And you're sure that when we reach the end of time, we'll just loop around at the beginning? There's no chance our atoms will be scattered to eternal non-existence? Silence fell in the spacecraft as everyone remembered that this was indeed a possible outcome. Finally, Akira sighed and said, Yes, it's possible. Dr. Weir never proved if time is a line or a circle or something else, but he did theorize that there's a chance. I have to take that chance, Ingrid. If it's really possible to go around the end of time and back to the beginning, then I've got to try. No matter what, it'll be better than what we're leaving behind anyway. Everyone nodded in assent. It was time to go. One last time, everyone strapped themselves into their seats in the cockpit. Then Akira programmed the time core, setting things up so the Archangel would not rematerialize until after the expected lifespan of the universe was over. With any luck, if Dr. Weir's predictions were correct, the ship would re-emerge on the far side of a second Big Bang, and the dawning of a whole new timeline. If she could get past this one final obstacle, Akira would be able to set the whole world right, build a better past, and find a perfect future to live in. Engage hyperspace. The quantum wavefront and the Venn gate opened at the same time. The Archangel was swallowed by a wall of shimmering yellow light. And then everything went wrong.